Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Machine and I'm a student who comes from a course called Consumer Behavior. So my matric card is number is G1925335. So at the beginning of today's presentation, let me start by giving you some information that is relevant to the topic and which is about persuasive communications. So, uh, before today's presentation, and let me start by giving you some relevant information, like the persuasive communication. So there are five main points, of the topic. Like number one, present one side of the argument when the audience is generally friendly, or when your position is the only one that will be present, or when you wanna immediate through temporal opinion change, which is the first one point of the persuasive communications. And number two, present both sides of the argument when the audience starts out disagreeing with you, and or one that is probable that the audience will hear the other side from someone else. And number three, when opposite views are presented one after another, and one presented less will probably be more effective. All right, number four. There will probably be more opinion change in the direction you want if you exactly state your conclusion than if you let the audition draw their own. Except when they are rather intelligent, then implicit conclusions are better. And number four, fear appears. So what is a fear appears? Which means you have to be finding generally show a positive relationship between intensity of fear, and because the amount of attitude change if recommendations for action are explicit and possible, but negative reaction otherwise. So, the points that I mentioned before above, which is about the five persuasive communications, and another perspectives. For instance, the variables. There are four elements. Like number one, source. So why we're going to talk about the source? Because we have to come up with a question like what characteristics of the speaker affect the persuasive impact, which is about the number one, source. And number two, communication. So that's a simple typo, like the also we have to come up with a question like what aspect of the message will have the most impact. And number three, audience. So also the question is about how persuadable are the individuals in the audience. So the last one, number four, audience reactions. So the reactions of audience is important because we have to know that what aspects of the source and the communication elected counter arguing reactions in the audience. So we have to be clear about the variables, and such as precise. So from the perspective of precise, we have to know that there are four elements as well. Like the number one is attention, and number two is comparison, and number three is acceptance, and number four is retention. Let's gonna talk about respectively. So number one, attention is that one must first get the intended audience to listen to what one has to say, and number two, the intended audience must understand the argument or message is present, and number three, acceptance, acceptance, which is about the intended audience must accept the arguments or conclusions presented in the communication. This acceptance is based on the rewards presented in the message. And number four, retention, which is about the message must be remembered and have a staying power. All right, let's move on to the next point, like the person's persistent of opinion change in communication. So we have to take cares like communication from a positive source leads to more rapid decay of attitude change over time than one from a negative source. And number two, complex or a complex message produces slower decay of attitude change. And number three, attitude change is more persistent over time if the receiver actively participates in. And for the number three, there are 2 points. Which one is repeating a communication tends to prolong its influence. Another one, more of the desired opinion change may be found some time after exposure to the communication than right after exposure. All right, so we are gonna talk about the chapter objectives. So number one, it's important for consumer researchers to understand the nature and power attitudes. And number two, attitudes are more complex than they first appear. And number three, we form attitudes in several ways. And number four, a need to maintain consistency amount out of our attitude component motivates us to alter one or more of them. All right, let's talk about the learning objective. So learning objective is important for consumer researchers to understand the nature and power of attitudes. And attitudes is about a lasting general evaluation of people, objects, advertisements, or issues. And last one, the attitude objective, attitude objective is about anything towards which one has an attitude. So here we're gonna talk about the self perception theory, like the foot in the door technique. So which means is that consumer is more likely to comply with a request if he has first agreed to come with a smaller request. And number two, lowball technique, which means person is asked for a small favor and is informed after agreeing to it that it will be very costly. And number three, door in the face technique, which means person is first asked to do something extreme of which he refuses, then asked to do something smaller. So let's move on next one. Like the attitudes are more complex than they first appear. There are five effects, like high involvement hierarchy and low involvement hierarchy, and experiential hierarchy effects, and independence hypothesis, and cognitive effect model. So here, we're gonna talk about like the social judgment theory. So we're gonna have new information about attitude objects in light of what we already know or feel, and there are two point elements like innate attitude, which equals to frame of reference, and the attitudes of acceptance or rejection, like assessment effects and contrast effects. And for example, here is choosing mothers choose peanut butter, and like the balance thereof, which is consideration of how a person might perceive relations among different attitudes, objects, and how he might alter attitudes to maintain consistent. And here's a trait attitude structures, and which is three components are which are person, perception of attitude objective, and perception of other person or objective. So here which is have a attitude commitment like the internationalization, which is a high level, deep seated attitudes became part of consumer value system, and the identification like the middle level, and the compliance like the lowest level, like the consumer firm's attitude because it gains rewards or avoid punishments. So last one, I'll talk about a need to maintain consistency among out of our attitudinal components often motivates us to alter one or more of them. So we have to know that our value or seek harmony among like the thinkings, feelings, and behaviors, and we have to know that we will change components to make them consistent. And the last one, which is relates to the value of cognitive dissonance, and we have to take action to resolve in dissonance when our attitudes and behaviors are inconsistent. Alright, and thank you so much for listening my reputation and watching the videos. Thank you so much.